He does not speak. He does not explain himself. He does not ask for permission. He moves. That is the entire lesson. That is the whole philosophy. That one image, frozen in a single second of cinema, contains more practical wisdom about power, confidence, and survival than anything a motivational speaker has ever told you. The room smells like blood and concrete. There are 12 men between John Wick and the door. Not 8, not 10, 12. And John Wick is on his knees. His hands are zip-tied behind his back. One of the men laughs. Another says something to his partner, the kind of laugh that says, "This is already over." And then John Wick headbutts the man in front of him so hard the man's nose shatters on impact. He grabs the falling body to absorb a bullet from the second man. He moves through that room like geometry, every angle calculated before he has consciously processed it. 47 seconds, 12 men. One man walks out, and that man is bleeding so badly that he can barely lift his arm. Here is what nobody talks about. Here is what nobody analyzes. Those men did not underestimate John Wick because they were stupid. They underestimated John Wick because he allowed them to. He walked into that room already knowing how it would end. The confidence was not in the fighting. The confidence was in the absolute certainty, before a single punch was thrown, that he was the most dangerous thing in that space. Not because he was arrogant, because he had done the work. Because he had paid a price that nobody in that room had ever paid. And Niccolò Machiavelli, writing in a cold stone room in Florence, Italy, in 1513, while imprisoned and being tortured by the very people he had served, understood this truth more deeply than almost anyone who had ever lived. Let us go back, all the way back, not to Florence, not to John Wick's training. Let us go back to the moment that produces the kind of person who becomes dangerous. Not dangerous with weapons, dangerous with certainty. In 1498, Niccolò Machiavelli was 29 years old and was appointed as the second chancellor of the Republic of Florence. He was not born into wealth. He was not born into nobility. He was born into the family of a lawyer who could barely afford books. But Machiavelli read everything he could find: Roman history, Greek philosophy, military strategy, political theory, with a hunger that bordered on obsession. He believed with absolute certainty that the world operated by laws. Not moral laws, not divine laws, practical laws, laws of power, laws of human behavior. And if you understood those laws deeply enough, if you studied them the way a mathematician studies equations, you could navigate any situation with precision. For 14 years, Machiavelli served Florence with everything he had. He went on diplomatic missions. He reorganized the Florentine military. He met Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared and fascinating men in Italy, and studied him the way a scientist studies a specimen under glass. He watched Borgia operate. He watched him consolidate power through a combination of strategic brutality and genuine generosity. He watched him move through enemies the way water moves through rocks, not by smashing through, but by finding every crack, every weakness, every gap. And then, in 1512, everything collapsed. The Medici family returned to Florence. The Republic fell. And Machiavelli, the man who had served Florence for 14 years, was accused of conspiracy, stripped of every position he held, arrested and tortured on the strappado. For anyone who does not know what the strappado is, they bound your wrists behind your back, attached a rope to your wrists, hoisted you up by your arms until your shoulders dislocated, and then dropped you, stopping just before you hit the ground. They did this to Machiavelli 4 times, and he did not break. He did not confess. He did not name names that were not there to name. They released him. They exiled him to a small farm outside Florence called Sant'Andrea in Percusina. And it was there, in that exile, in that humiliation, that Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince. There is something that happens to a certain kind of person when everything is taken away from them. Most people collapse. Most people surrender the narrative. They begin to tell themselves that it was not their fault, that the world was unfair, that they were betrayed, that luck was against them. They build an identity around their victimhood because victimhood is comfortable. It requires nothing from you. And then there are the others. The ones who, in the middle of total destruction, pull out a notebook. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513. He dedicated it to Lorenzo de' Medici, to the very family whose return had destroyed him, as a kind of offering, a demonstration of value. The man who had just been tortured was writing a manual on power and handing it to the people who had tortured him. Not out of cowardice, out of absolute tactical intelligence. He understood something that most people never learn. Your enemy's victory is only temporary if you become too valuable to ignore. The Prince was not published in his lifetime. He never regained his political position. He died in 1527, poor and largely forgotten. But the manuscript circulated privately, and the people who read it, the kings, the generals, the strategists who came after him, they recognized immediately that this was not philosophy. This was physics. This was a description of how power actually operates beneath the surface of civilization, beneath the politeness and the social contracts and the moral language that powerful people use to justify things they had already decided to do. 512 years later, a screenwriter named Derek Kolstad sat down and wrote a character. He gave that character no speech, no manifesto, no explanation of his worldview. He gave that character a very particular way of moving through the world, and audiences watching John Wick for the first time felt something they could not quite articulate. A strange, uncomfortable recognition. Something about the way this man operated felt true. Something about the clarity of his purpose. Something about the complete absence of apology. That something had a name. It had always had a name. Machiavelli gave it a name. Virtù. Not virtue in the English sense. Not morality. Not goodness. Virtù, in Machiavelli's original Italian, meant something closer to force of will, strategic excellence, the capacity to impose your intention on reality through a combination of skill, timing, and absolute psychological commitment. Machiavelli wrote that a prince, by which he meant any person seeking to achieve something significant, must possess virtù as the core of their identity. Not as a tool they pick up and put down, as the core, the irreducible center. That exchange, that single exchange, that is virtù in action. John Wick does not perform confidence. He does not pump himself up. He does not recite affirmations. He does not suppress his fear or pretend it does not exist. He exists in a state where fear is simply not the organizing principle of his behavior. He is afraid of dying. He knows he might die. He acts anyway, not despite knowing this, but through knowing this. Because fear-informed is no longer fear. It is information. And information is the most powerful weapon in the world. This is the first law of Machiavellian confidence that nobody is talking about. Most people think confidence means not being afraid. That is why most people are not confident. They are waiting to stop being afraid. They are waiting for the feeling to pass. They are waiting for enough successes to pile up before they believe in themselves. Machiavelli would have called this catastrophic strategic thinking. You are waiting for a feeling before you take an action, when the truth, the uncomfortable, verifiable, reproducible truth, is that the feeling comes after the action, not before. In 2010, a behavioral psychologist named Amy Cuddy conducted a study at Harvard Business School. She found that people who physically embodied confidence before high-stakes situations, before a job interview, before a negotiation, actually changed their hormonal profiles within 2 minutes. Testosterone, the hormone associated with dominance and confidence, increased by 20%. Cortisol, the hormone associated with stress and anxiety, decreased by 25%. The feeling followed the posture, not the other way around. Machiavelli wrote this 497 years before Amy Cuddy ran that experiment. He wrote in Chapter 6 of The Prince, "It is better to act and repent than to not act and repent." This is not recklessness. This is the recognition that waiting for perfect conditions, waiting for confidence to arrive before you act confident, is itself the most dangerous strategy available to you. Let us talk about the real reason most people are not confident. Not because they lack ability, not because they had a bad childhood, not even because of fear. The real reason most people are not confident is that they have made a secret agreement with themselves, an agreement they have never consciously examined, that says, "I will be confident when the world confirms that I deserve to be." You know what that agreement looks like in practice. It looks like waiting for your boss to notice your work before you advocate for yourself. It looks like waiting to look good before you wear the clothes that express who you really are. It looks like waiting for someone else to believe in your idea before you fully commit to it. It looks like spending your entire life applying for permission to be yourself. Machiavelli called the people who wait for external confirmation by a very specific name. He called them dependent upon fortune. And he was brutal about what this means. He wrote, and this is in chapter 25 of The Prince, that fortune controls about half of human affairs. Half. And the other half is under the control of the individual. But here is the critical piece. Fortune, Machiavelli argued, is like a river. When it floods, it destroys everything in its path. But when it is calm, you have time to build embankments, to dig channels, to prepare infrastructure that controls the direction of the water. And the people who do not build while fortune is calm are destroyed when it floods. Not because they were unlucky, because they were passive. John Wick built for 18 years. He completed the impossible task, killing 3 men in a single night with a pencil. Not because he suddenly became dangerous on that night. He had been building since he was a child. The night Vigo's son came to his house was simply fortune's flood. And John Wick had built embankments that nobody had seen. If you have watched a YouTube channel for 6 months and never subscribed, and you realize today that this content has genuinely changed something in the way you think, that is exactly how John Wick felt when Winston told him, "You have to be who you are, John." Do not negotiate with yourself about this. Hit subscribe, because what is coming in the next 30 minutes of this video is the part that most people are never going to hear. Let us go deeper, because what Machiavelli was describing was not just a philosophy of action. It was a complete psychological architecture. And the most radical piece of that architecture, the piece that has been sanitized and softened and made palatable by every self-help book published in the last 50 years, is this. Most people's lack of confidence is not a psychological problem. It is a political problem. By political, Machiavelli did not mean partisan. He meant the organization of power relationships, the way authority is distributed, the way perception functions as reality, the way the stories people tell about you become the limits of what you are allowed to be. In chapter 18 of The Prince, Machiavelli wrote something that scandalized all of Europe when it was finally published after his death. He wrote that a prince must know how to use both the lion and the fox. The lion because he is strong enough to frighten the wolves. The fox because he is clever enough to recognize the traps. And that a prince who is only a lion will be caught in traps, and a prince who is only a fox will not be defended from wolves. Most people who try to develop confidence become only the lion. They learn assertiveness. They learn to speak up. They learn to take up space. And then they are surprised when they walk into a trap they should have seen coming. They assert themselves at the wrong moment, with the wrong person, in the wrong room. And the result is not empowerment, it is humiliation. And that humiliation teaches them, incorrectly, that confidence is dangerous. And they retreat. What Machiavelli understood, and what John Wick demonstrates across 4 films with almost documentary precision, is that the most dangerous move in any power dynamic is the one your opponent does not recognize as a move. True confidence does not announce itself. True confidence does not need to. True confidence is quiet, precise, and deeply strategic. Now let us talk about what happens when someone who has built all of this, the psychological architecture, the skills, the strategic intelligence, is suddenly stripped of their context. This is the moment in Machiavelli's life that most biographers rush past. Not the torture, not the exile. What happened to Machiavelli after he was released and sent to Sant'Andrea is psychologically one of the most remarkable things in the history of human resilience. He wrote a letter to his friend Francesco Vittori in December of 1513 that is one of the most extraordinary personal documents ever written. He described his daily life in exile. He woke up early. He worked on his farm. He checked the traps for birds. He ate lunch with his household workers. He played cards at the local tavern in the afternoon. He got into arguments with the card players. He felt ordinary, petty, bored. And then, he wrote, when evening came, he returned to his house and went into his study. And he took off his working clothes, the dirty, ordinary clothes of a man exiled to a farm. And he dressed himself in what he called regal and courtly garments. Not because anyone was watching, not to impress anyone, but because he was about to enter the courts of ancient men. He was about to read Livy and Tacitus and Plutarch. He was about to have a conversation with the Romans. And he dressed for that conversation. He wrote, "I am not ashamed to speak with them and to ask them the reason for their actions, and they, in their kindness, answer me." There is a word for what Machiavelli was doing in that letter that most people do not have the emotional vocabulary to describe. He was refusing. In the middle of total defeat, in the middle of the humiliation of exile, In the middle of a life that had collapsed around him, he was refusing to let his external circumstances define his internal identity. He was not pretending the exile was not real. He was not performing positivity. He was doing something much harder. He was maintaining the dignity of the internal life that no external power had the authority to touch. This is the second law of Machiavellian confidence, and it is the one that will genuinely change how you carry yourself if you understand it completely. Your identity is not a product of your circumstances. Your circumstances are a product of your identity. And the reason most people are not confident is not because bad things have happened to them. It is because they have allowed bad things to rewrite their internal script. Every time something goes wrong, they update the story they tell about who they are. They were rejected, so now they are the kind of person who gets rejected. They failed, so now they are the kind of person who fails. They were humiliated, so now they are the kind of person who gets humiliated. And here is the catastrophic consequence of that internal rewrite. Your behavior follows your identity, not the other way around. If you walk into a room believing you are the kind of person who gets overlooked, you will be overlooked. Not because the room is rigged against you, but because every micro-signal you send, your posture, your eye contact, the latency between when you have a thought and when you express it, the way you qualify your sentences, all of it communicates in a language that humans read far faster than any spoken words, exactly how you see yourself. Psychologists call this behavioral congruence. What you believe about yourself radiates outward in behaviors you are often not consciously aware of, and other people respond to those behaviors as information. In 2019, a study published in the journal Psychological Science found that observers could judge a person's socioeconomic status and social dominance with statistically significant accuracy after watching only 5 seconds of silent video. No audio, no context, just observation of movement and bearing. 5 seconds. The people they were watching did not know they were being judged. The information was already there, written in how they moved through space. Machiavelli knew this in 1513. He wrote that a prince must not only be strong, but must appear strong, not as a manipulation, but as a responsibility. Because a prince who allows himself to appear weak teaches those around him to treat weakness as acceptable. He creates a permission structure for his own subjugation. And John Wick, across every film, in every scene, never gives anyone that permission. Not once. Vigo is not afraid of John Wick's skills. He has men with skills. Vigo is afraid of John Wick's identity, the unrevised, uncompromising, total commitment to a self-concept that does not bend to circumstances. And the reason Vigo is afraid of that is because he has never met it at full strength before. Most people, when put under enough pressure, update their identity. They negotiate with reality. They make concessions. John Wick does not make concessions, not because he is incapable of them, because he has decided at some deep foundational level that there are things worth more than safety. This is the third law of Machiavellian confidence, and it is the most dangerous one. You must decide what you are worth dying for. Not metaphorically, not as a motivational exercise, as a genuine reckoning with your own values. Because until you know what you will not trade away, until you have drawn the line that you will not cross regardless of the pressure applied, you do not have an identity. You have a set of preferences, and preferences bend. Identity does not. Machiavelli had a word for this too. He called it necessity. He wrote that necessity makes men do things they would never do voluntarily. But he also wrote, and this is the part people miss, that the intelligent man creates his own necessity. He does not wait for circumstances to force him into clarity. He chooses his commitments before the crisis arrives. He decides, in the calm before the flood, what he is and what he is not, so that when the flood comes, he does not have to think, he just acts. In cognitive psychology, this is called implementation intention, the decision made in advance about exactly how you will respond to a specific triggering situation. Researchers Peter Gollwitzer and Pascal Sheeran published a meta-analysis in 2006 reviewing 94 studies and found that people who formed specific implementation intentions were between 2 and 3 times more likely to follow through on their goals than people who relied on motivation and willpower alone. 2 to 3 times. Not because they were stronger people, because they had removed the decision from the moment of pressure. John Wick did not decide, in the moment Yosef broke down the door, whether to respond. He had already decided. Somewhere, years ago, in a place nobody saw, he had drawn the line. He had said, "This is the thing I will not tolerate." And so, when the moment arrived, he did not experience it as a decision. He experienced it as a recognition. Most people watching that scene think, that was forced. That was not a choice. And they are wrong. That was the most powerful expression of agency in all 4 films. Because John Wick was not capitulating to Santino. He was honoring an obligation he had freely taken on when it served him. He was keeping his word, not because he had to, because his word was the only thing, in a world that had taken everything else, that remained entirely his. Machiavelli wrote, "A prince must keep faith when he can, but when it destroys him, he must break it." And John Wick does the exact opposite. He keeps faith when it destroys him, because he is not a prince in Machiavelli's political sense. He is something rarer. He is a man who has decided that his integrity is worth more than his safety. That combination, Machiavellian strategic intelligence combined with absolute personal integrity, is the rarest, most magnetic, most genuinely terrifying configuration of human personality available. It is the configuration that makes rooms go quiet when someone enters. It is the configuration that makes opponents recalculate their position before a single word has been exchanged. Let us pause here for a moment and acknowledge something uncomfortable. Because we have been talking about John Wick and Machiavelli and confidence and strategy, and it has been intellectual and cinematic, and perhaps somewhat safe. Let us make it uncomfortable. Most people reading about Machiavelli, most people watching John Wick, experience it as escapism. They think, that is for characters in stories. That is for people who were trained from childhood. That is not for me. I am someone who grew up in an ordinary house, with ordinary pressures, with ordinary fears. I am someone who has a job and a mortgage and a reputation to protect, and people depending on me. I cannot be John Wick. And Machiavelli would look at that statement and say, very quietly, "You have just told me the exact nature of your cage. Because the cage is not the mortgage. The cage is not the job. The cage is the belief that your ordinary life requires ordinary behavior. The cage is the conviction that your circumstances determine your range of motion. And the most insidious thing about that cage is that it is comfortable. The bars are padded. The food is decent. Nobody is actively hurting you. And so you never test the bars. You never discover that the lock was never locked. When was the last time you walked yourself to the edge? Not the comfortable edge. Not the edge where you felt a little nervous and then retreated, and then rewarded yourself for being brave. The real edge. The edge where you had nothing left and you kept going anyway. Not because you wanted to, but because you had already decided, before you arrived at the edge, that stopping was not an option. Because that is the only place where identity is actually forged. Not in the comfortable days, in the impossible ones. Machiavelli was 58 years old when he died. He never regained his position. He never published The Prince. He spent the last 14 years of his life in a kind of exile that most modern people would diagnose as clinical depression. A man who had been at the center of history, reduced to playing cards at a rural tavern. And yet, in those 14 years, he wrote The Prince, the discourses on Livy, The Art of War, a history of Florence, several plays, and a series of diplomatic reports that historians still study today. In the modern vernacular, we would say, he had no reason to keep going. He had been beaten. He had been humiliated. He had been tortured. He had been exiled. He had been ignored. He had been impoverished. He had every reason to stop. He did not stop. Not because he was a superhero. Not because he was immune to despair. His letters from this period are full of despair. Genuine, raw, unperformative despair. But underneath the despair, held separate from it, protected from it by something that Machiavelli himself called Virtù, was the work. The relentless, disciplined, daily work. Not because he expected to be rewarded for it, because the work was the only thing, in the end, that the world could not take from him. That is the fourth law of Machiavellian confidence. And it is perhaps the most important one. The most confident people in the world are not confident because they have won more. They are confident because they have built something, skill, knowledge, capacity, that exists independent of external validation. They do not need you to believe in them because they have evidence, private, personal, irreducible evidence, that they are capable of things most people cannot do. There is a concept in performance psychology called autonomous stage competence, the point at which a skill becomes so deeply embedded that it requires no conscious processing. It is what Malcolm Gladwell, drawing from Anders Ericsson's research, approximated with the 10,000-hour framework, though Ericsson was careful to clarify that it is not merely 10,000 hours of repetition. It is 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, of pushing against the current edge of your ability, of failing and adjusting and failing again. The reason this matters for confidence is counterintuitive. Most people think that confidence comes from success. Ericsson's research suggests something different. Confidence, real, unshakable, autonomous confidence, comes from the deep internalization of a skill to the point where failure no longer registers as evidence about your identity. It registers only as information about your current method. The failure does not touch you. It informs you. John Wick is not confident because he has never lost. He is confident because every time he has lost, and he loses badly, repeatedly across 4 films, the loss does not revise his identity. It refines his method. Right now, if this is landing in a way that feels different from what you have heard before, if something in this script is touching something real in you, I want you to think about one specific situation in your life where you have been waiting for permission to be fully yourself. Not in a general way, in a specific, concrete, identifiable situation. Because the next section of this video is going to give you the exact framework for walking into that situation differently. And if you share this video with one person who needs to hear it, one person in your life who is living smaller than they should be, that is more valuable than anything I can tell you to do. Share it. let us talk about the chapter of Machiavelli that every self-help book has deliberately avoided for 500 years. Chapter 8 of The Prince, on cruelty used well. Before you recoil from that word, let me tell you what Machiavelli actually meant, because the traditional translation into English has done him a profound disservice. What Machiavelli called cruelty in the political context of a 16th century Italian principality, in the psychological context of your modern life, looks like this: the willingness to be honest in a situation where dishonesty would be more comfortable. The willingness to end a relationship that is draining you when maintaining it would be easier. The willingness to say no to someone who expects yes, and to say it without excessive explanation or apology. The willingness to allow someone to experience the consequences of their behavior rather than protecting them from those consequences. These things feel cruel in the moment. They feel unkind. They generate social friction. They make you uncomfortable. And the people around you will often respond to them with anger or hurt because they have been accustomed to your compliance, and your refusal to comply feels like a betrayal. Machiavelli wrote, "Men should be either treated generously or destroyed, because they take revenge for slight injuries, but cannot do so for serious ones." This sounds violent in political translation. In psychological translation, it means small compromises accumulate. Small, repeated surrenders of your boundaries, your values, your authentic expression. These do not make you seem agreeable. They make you seem exploitable. And the people who exploit you do not respect you for your generosity. They simply come back for more. The confidence displayed in that scene is not about violence. It is about the total absence of internal negotiation. Aurelio does not wonder, what will Joseph do to me? He does not run a risk analysis. He acts from his values instantaneously, because his values are not something he thinks about. They are something he is. And that instantaneity, that refusal to negotiate with yourself about whether your values are worth acting on, is one of the most commanding things one human being can project at another. Now, let us go to the place in John Wick's story that nobody wants to think about. The place that is more painful than any of the fights. John Wick retired. He loved a woman named Helen. He built a life that was quiet and ordinary and completely chosen. He walked away from everything he had been. For an unknown number of years, the films suggest at least a decade, he was not the Baba Yaga. He was someone's husband. He was someone who took care of a dog. He was someone who drove too fast on an empty road early in the morning because speed was the only thing that remained from the old life that was still safe. And when Helen died, he did not immediately become John Wick again. He sat in a house that still smelled like her. He watched a video on his phone of her laughing. He was not a weapon in that moment. He was a devastated, ordinary man, alone in a house at night with a dead phone and a grief so large it had become its own geography. John Wick, sitting in his car in the driveway at night, watching the video of Helen on his phone. No music for a moment, just his face, just the blue light of the screen. He is not composing himself. He is not preparing a strategy. He is just a man who is destroyed by love. This scene exists not as backstory. It exists as the source code, because the confidence that makes John Wick terrifying is not machined from stone. It is forged from love, from loss, from the specific knowledge, bought at the highest possible price, that the thing worth fighting for is already gone, and that the fight ahead is therefore not about winning. It is about honoring what was. It is about being someone who does not let love die twice. First the person, then the meaning. Machiavelli wrote near the end of The Prince, that a man who is fighting for love fights with more ferocity than a man who is fighting for money or power or territory. Because money and power and territory are things you can negotiate about. Love, once it has been real, cannot be negotiated. It is either honored or it is betrayed. And the man who has loved something real and lost it, and chooses to honor it through his subsequent action, that man is not operating from confidence in the ordinary sense. He is operating from something older and deeper, something that predates psychology and strategy and philosophy. He is operating from grief converted to purpose. And there is no human force more powerful in the observable world than grief that has been converted intentionally into purpose. Let us bring this back to you, because somewhere in your life, maybe many years ago, maybe recently, maybe in a way so quiet you barely registered it, something happened that hurt you in a place you have not let anyone see. Maybe it was a public failure. Maybe it was a betrayal. Maybe it was a moment when you were humiliated by someone who should have protected you. Maybe it was the quieter, more total humiliation of simply being invisible, of working hard and being not seen, of being the most capable person in the room and not being chosen. And what you did with that experience was the same thing most people do. You used it to limit yourself. You used it as evidence about what you are allowed to expect. You built a ceiling out of the memory of a floor collapsing. Machiavelli would say, that is your raw material. Not your obstacle, your raw material. Every experience of humiliation, every moment of being overlooked, every failure that left a mark, that is not something that happened to you. That is something that was deposited into you. Capital that has not been accessed. History that has not been translated into strategy. There is data behind this. In 2007, Carol Dweck published a landmark study from Stanford University following hundreds of students over several years. Students who had been taught to view their failures as information rather than identity, who had what Dweck called a growth mindset, achieved statistically significantly better outcomes than students of equivalent intellectual ability who viewed their failures as evidence of fixed capacity. The difference was not talent. It was the story they told about their failures. It was whether the fall revised the self or refined the method. Now we arrive at the moment. The scene in John Wick's story that represents the absolute peak, not of his violence, but of his identity. Chapter 4. The Duel at Sacré-Cœur. Paris. Dawn. John Wick has been excommunicated. He has been shot multiple times. He has fallen down 100 stairs in Paris and gotten back up. He has fought through an entire building. He has walked from New York to Morocco and back. He is so damaged, so physically exhausted, that by any medical measure he should be incapable of standing. He has done things in the preceding 12 hours that are physiologically impossible. And now he is standing on the steps of the most beautiful church in Paris as the sun rises, and he is facing the Marquis de Gramont, a man who represents everything that has been arrayed against him, not just across this film, but across his entire story, in a duel. The terms of the duel are simple. If John wins, he is free. If John loses, he is dead. He falls. The Marquis walks toward him with the absolute certainty of a man who has won. And this is the moment. Not because he won, because of what he says, because of the name he says. He does not celebrate. He does not look satisfied. He says the name of the person the entire journey was about. He returns, in his last conscious moment, to the original thing, the love, the loss, the source. Machiavelli ends The Prince not with a triumphant declaration of power, but with a poem. He quotes Petrarch, a love poet, a man writing about the beauty of Italy, the longing for something that has been destroyed, the hope that it might be rebuilt. A man who built an entire architecture of strategic power out of the ruins of something he loved. He ends with a love poem because he knows, and he wants you to know, that power divorced from something real, something that matters, something worth protecting, is simply violence. And violence alone never builds anything. The confidence Machiavelli is teaching, the confidence John Wick embodies, is not the confidence of the man who has never lost. It is the confidence of the man who has lost everything and chose, anyway, to keep going. Not for victory, for meaning. But here is where the story turns. Here is the part that pulls the rug out. What if John Wick had survived the duel, survived everything, and had to build an ordinary life again? What then? Because here is the vulnerability that Machiavelli never fully resolved. Here is the crack in the architecture. The Machiavellian man, the man who has built himself into a weapon of strategic intelligence and unbreakable identity, often finds that he is extraordinarily good at surviving crises and extraordinarily bad at sustaining peace. The very architecture that makes him formidable in conflict makes him uncomfortable in contentment. He does not know what to do when there is nothing to fight. He cannot operate without a defined adversary, an impossible task, a reason to be at full capacity. He becomes, in peacetime, a man who creates his own crises just to have something to overcome. The fifth law of Machiavellian confidence, the one that is hardest to accept, is this. You can use the architecture to build something, but the architecture must eventually serve life, not replace it. The danger of becoming too good at surviving is that you stop allowing yourself to be vulnerable to anything worth surviving for. You become so defended, so strategically positioned, so thoroughly in control of your own narrative, that you build walls so high that nothing painful can get in, and nothing worth feeling can get in either. This is not a movie problem. This is a real, documented, measurable psychological phenomenon. Researchers studying military veterans and high-performance professionals have consistently found that the skills that produce excellence under pressure, heightened vigilance, strategic detachment, emotional compartmentalization, become liabilities when the pressure is removed. Not because the skills are bad, because they were designed for a specific environment, and peace is a different environment. The genuinely confident person, the person who has done all the work, built all the capacity, learned all the strategy, eventually has to learn the hardest skill of all. The skill of lowering their defenses voluntarily. The skill of allowing themselves to be known. The skill of letting someone else, for once, see the room before the lights go on.
So how do you do it? How do you take everything we have covered, the Virtù, the identity architecture, the lion and fox combination, the grief converted to purpose, and translate it into something practical, something you can carry out of this video and into the specific situation in your life where you are currently not living at full capacity? Machiavelli gives you the framework. John Wick demonstrates it. Here it is. Step 1. Define your line. Not your goal, your line. The thing you will not trade away. The thing that, if asked to surrender, you would walk away from the entire game first. Until you know your line with absolute specificity, you do not have an identity. You have preferences. And as we established, preferences bend. Step 2. Build the private evidence. Not the external validation, not the external recognition, the private evidence. The work you do at 5 in the morning before anyone is watching. the skill you develop in the room alone because you have decided that excellence is not a performance, it is a standard. The private evidence is the embankment you build before the flood. Every hour of deliberate practice, every book studied, every failure analyzed, this is infrastructure. This is what Machiavelli was doing in his study in Sant'Andrea, in his regal garments, with the door closed. Step 3. Remove the decision from the moment of pressure. Decide now, in the calm, how you will respond to the specific situations that historically break you. The moment your boss dismisses your idea in a meeting. The moment someone treats you as if your contribution does not matter. The moment you are told no. Decide in advance what your response will be. Not the words, the posture, the internal posture, the John Wick opening his eyes and pouring the drink posture. Unhurried, certain, already decided. Step 4. Allow the grief. Whatever loss, humiliation, or failure has become the foundation of your limiting story, allow it. Not indulge it, allow it. Because the grief is not your enemy. The grief is the material. Machiavelli tortured on the strappado. John Wick watching the video of Helen on his phone. These are not scenes to be overcome. They are scenes to be integrated. The grief stays. What changes is whether the grief locks you or launches you. Step 5. Walk into the room as if you have already decided how it ends. Not with arrogance, with commitment. The distinction is crucial. Arrogance is performed confidence, borrowed against an account that has nothing in it. Commitment is operative certainty, drawn from the private evidence you have built, the identity you have defined, the line you have drawn. When you walk in with commitment, other people feel it before you have said a single word. Because, as we established at the beginning, the message is in the body, and the body is in the identity, and the identity is in every decision you have made in every private moment when nobody was watching. Machiavelli died in poverty in 1527. He was never fully forgiven by the Medici. He never regained his position. He never saw The Prince published. He was, by any external measure, a man who had failed to capitalize on his own brilliance. But here is what happened after. The Prince was published in 1532, 5 years after his death. It was immediately condemned by the Catholic Church and placed on the Index of Forbidden Books in 1559. And then something extraordinary happened. Everyone read it. Every king, every cardinal, every general, every statesman in Europe read it. Banned books are the most read books. Napoleon carried a personal annotated copy. Catherine the Great of Russia studied it. Frederick the Great of Prussia wrote a refutation of it and then governed almost entirely according to its principles. Bismarck read it. Henry VIII read it. Elizabeth I read it. Abraham Lincoln, who governed the most fractured republic in the history of the world through the most violent period in American history, kept 3 books on his desk: the Bible, Shakespeare's collected plays, and The Prince. A man who was tortured, exiled, impoverished, and died before seeing a single word of his work in print is, 500 years later, the most widely read political philosopher in human history. Not despite his suffering, because of what he chose to build with it. John Wick is not a power fantasy. It was never a power fantasy. It is a meditation on the cost of becoming excellent and the question of whether excellence alone is worth the cost. The answer the films give is nuanced and honest and deeply human. Excellence is worth the cost only when it is in service of something you love. The moment it becomes its own end, the moment the capacity becomes the point, you are no longer living.
The confidence Machiavelli
You are
teaches is
performing.
not the confidence of the man who can dominate any room. It is the confidence of the man who knows, with perfect clarity, why he is in the room, what he is fighting for, what line he will not cross, what loss has shaped him, what love has named him. That clarity, that specific, earned, irreducible clarity, is what makes a room go quiet when you enter it. Not your physical presence, not your skills, not your title or your income or your achievements. Your clarity. The sense that this person knows exactly who they are and exactly what they are about, and that nothing in this room has the power to change that. You have been carrying a version of yourself that has been shaped by other people's assessments of you, by moments when you were too small, too slow, too late, too wrong, by a history of adjusting who you are to fit what the world seemed willing to receive. And somewhere in that history, you made a decision, not consciously, not deliberately, but through accumulated compromise, that the world's version of you was the real one. It was never the real one. John Wick returning for his car is not a story about revenge. It is a story about a man reclaiming the version of himself that was always there, beneath the retirement, beneath the ordinary life, beneath the grief. Not erasing the ordinary life, not undoing the grief. Reclaiming the identity that existed before the world got to work on it. You are the man Vigo is afraid of. You are the person who once completed the impossible task in a way that nobody who watched you could quite explain afterward. You are the one sitting in the study in Sant'Andrea at night, dressed in your regal garments, having the conversation with the ancient men, because you know that what you are building is not for today's audience. It is for the history that outlives you. The world will give you permission to be ordinary. It will do this quietly and continuously and with great warmth. It will offer you comfort in exchange for your edge, safety in exchange for your ambition, acceptance in exchange for your truth. It will make ordinariness look very attractive. And it will do this not because the world is cruel, but because ordinary is easier to manage. Ordinary does not make demands. Ordinary does not force reckonings. Ordinary does not walk into a room and change the temperature. You did not click this video to be ordinary. Machiavelli knew this about you 500 years before you were born. He wrote The Prince for you, for the person who refuses to accept that their circumstances are their ceiling. For the person who is sitting in their own exile, in their own Sant'Andrea, reading history in the middle of the night, building something that nobody around them can quite see yet. He wrote, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." And John Wick, stepping into that duel at dawn, bleeding, damaged, determined, whispered the same thing, not with words, with steps. One step, then another, then another. If this video reached something in you that most videos do not reach, the most powerful thing you can do right now is not subscribe. It is not like. It is to go into the specific situation in your life where you have been living smaller than you should, and walk into it differently. Today, not tomorrow, today. Let this be the version of you that watched a video and then changed something real. And then come back and tell me in the comments what changed. Because your story, your specific, irreducible, Machiavellian story, is the most powerful thing you own. The window that Vigo sees you through has been lying to him. Time to correct that.